So welcome everybody. Welcome to our CSA Group webinar as part of the Together Ensemble conference. Today we are going to talk about how standards can support actions towards the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how CSA Group is supporting this initiative. So my name is Anna Copeland, and my colleague Adriana Shuyen and I are project managers in the Environment and Climate Change Division at CSA Group. And we will be your hosts today and moderators. So thank you so much again for being here today. Before we get started, we'd just like to go over a couple housekeeping items. First of all, we will have time for a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to put your questions in the chat throughout. And also please mute yourselves for the duration of the presentation and feel free to turn your video off as well. And finally, just a reminder that this session will be recorded and the organizers of the conference will be in touch following the session regarding sharing of the recording. Great. Okay, so just to give an overview of what the session's about, what we're going to talk about, we are going to give you a bit of background information on CSA Group and standards in general, and then we'll take you through our SDG journey and feature a case study where we mapped a specific standard to the SDGs. And then we'll talk about where we're going with our SDG work at CSA Group. And then, as I mentioned, we'll open it up to you for Q&A. Okay, great. So first off, like I said, we'll start with a little bit of background on CSA Group for those who may not be familiar with our organization or about standards in general. So CSA Group, Canadian Standards Association, is over 100 years old. We are Canada's largest standards development organization, and we facilitate the development and maintenance of over 3,000 standards. You might recognize us mostly from our mark on safety equipment, hockey helmets, kitchen sinks, other appliances and products, and this certification mark is the most visible part of what we do. We are headquartered in Toronto and have a global presence. We operate in over 13 countries and have 39 labs and offices around the world. Today, CSA Group employs 2,000 employees spread across our two distinct business units. Our commercial subsidiaries, which does the testing, inspection, and certification of various products and facilities to our standards. And where Adriana and I operate is in Standards, which is a nonprofit, and we develop standards with the help of our members, which come from government, industry, academia, consumer group, and many others. And we also produce various research reports to support or expand on other areas of standards development and educate and advocate for standards as well. And the mission of CSA Group is to enhance the lives of Canadians through the advancement of standards in the public and private sectors. We are a leader, as I mentioned, in standards research, development, education, and advocacy. And our technical and management standards are developed by over 10,000 members who help improve the safety, health, the environment, and economic efficiency in Canada and beyond. So as an accredited standards development organization, also known as an SDO, we are often asked, what are standards and why are they valuable? In a nutshell, standards are documents that provide the minimum requirements for the use, safety, performance, or design of products and services. Standards are non-biased and trusted documents because they are developed by groups of technical subject matter experts with a balanced representation across various interest groups and follow a consensus-based process. Standards are developed using a robust accredited process, which adds credibility, and they are living documents, which means that they can be updated every 5 years to reflect any updates in best practices or technologies. And standards are particularly valuable tools because they are recognized benchmarks and can be used to demonstrate good practice, whether to regulators, consumers, or investors. And this is valuable not only for established process and technologies, but can also be a game changer for supporting innovation. And finally, standards provide consistency, clarity, and transparency, which helps to reduce risk and uncertainty for organizations that work with them. So our standards go through an open, transparent, and consensus-based development process. Mind switching the slide, Adriana? Perfect, thank you. So I mentioned our consensus-based development process, and so all of the standards go through this similar process, which is an open, transparent development process, which ensures that the appropriate people are involved, the appropriate voices are heard, and the appropriate processes are followed in the development of each standard. And we operate under 12 areas of focus, which are highlighted in the symbols on the right. For example, Adriana and I are operating in the environment and climate change sector, where we work a lot in the circular economy and SDGs and natural resources. But the work of CSA also spans several other sectors, which include construction and infrastructure, healthcare and well-being, nuclear, petroleum, natural gas, information technologies, and many others. And standards help to harness this knowledge and expertise of the member experts that come from all walks of life and different backgrounds. And standards development committees, which are also called technical committees, are comprised of a balanced representation of these relevant stakeholders, which ensures that each party is being represented equally and to avoid bias in the standards development process. And CSA standards combine technical rigor with an inclusive process to develop solutions and guidance to meet changing market needs. Okay, great. So that's a little bit of background on CSA Group and standards. So now we'll provide you with some background on our SDG journey and why we decided to incorporate SDGs into our standards and standards development process. So there are various trends that we are seeing with government and industry as the SDGs have now broken into the mainstream of business reporting. So aligning activities to the SDGs is now deemed essential for corporate responsibility. And governments are directly charged with developing SDG strategies and monitoring and reporting on this progress. And sustainable development is also increasingly being prioritized by industry, shareholders, investors, and consumers alike. And while SDGs articulate outcomes to be achieved, they are more silent on the approaches to achieving these outcomes. Therefore, standard organizations and governments need tools and guidance on how to implement, measure, and demonstrate their actions to achieve the SDGs. And standards are a natural choice. And many companies are now using standards and frameworks to report on these SDG initiatives and achievements. So as previously mentioned, CSA Group standards can serve as essential tools to help organizations implement, measure, and demonstrate their actions towards the SDGs. And so we believe that if organizations and governments can link their standards standard activities to SDGs, the progress on achieving the SDGs has potential to become more consistent and comparable. And so again, why standards? They provide a solution to implement the SDGs that is complete, concise, and measurable. And they address the needs of organizations looking to support the SDGs by providing detailed methods of operationalization. And standards are ideally suited for achieving SDGs because they are structured, transparent, and like I mentioned, they follow that consensus-based development process that involves multi-stakeholder groups. And standards can be referenced in regulation, and 58% of our homegrown, which means CSA developed standards, are referenced in regulation to date. Okay, so now I'll hand it over to Adriana.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. So with that background in mind, understanding that there is a need between the UN SDGs and standards, CSA decided to initiate an SDG initiative. And the objective of that is to elevate the societal good mission and priorities within CSA Group by aligning the standard development processes with the UN SDGs. So how did we do this? Well, first, we did a preliminary assessment. So in 2020, we did an assessment of over 1,000 of CSA developed standards, and we identified that there was a strong link between CSA standards and at least one of the SDGs. We found that 80% of our standards actually did map and link to and support the SDGs. So with this preliminary assessment, we've confirmed that there is a need for clear, rigorous, and repeatable mapping methodology for the consistency in these results. And in our preliminary assessment, we also noted that the 4 top SDGs that our standards linked to were number 7, affordable and clean energy, 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, 11, sustainable cities and communities, and SDG 13, climate action. So once we identified that there was that need, we actually went ahead and decided to develop a research report on enabling sustainable development through standards. And we had funding provided by the Employment and Social Development Canada. And we also partnered with 3 academics. We had the Toronto Metropolitan University, the University of Guelph, and Niagara College all help us work on this research report. And in the report, we've developed a consistent SDG mapping methodology to map our standards with SDGs. And in that methodology, we also have a way to validate those SDG mapping results. And apart and separate to this report, we also developed several SDG case studies where we took individual standards and we took a deeper dive into them, interviewing users of the standard and developers of the standard to identify the linkages between those SDGs in a more in-depth manner. And those are also available on our website, along with the published report that was published last year in April. And in the report, we also have had recommendations for how to increase the alignment between our standards and the SDGs. In this 2-year program, we've developed that robust methodology that I mentioned, which is a 3-step process. We also decided that this mapping process would not only map to the SDG goals, but go one step further and map to the target level. And the reason for that is that it's more specific and there's a more clear, measurable linkage that we could then identify with the standards. So this formal mapping methodology, again, developed by our academic partners, had a 3-phase process to achieve consistency and accuracy in our mapping outcomes. So the first phase is our preliminary mapping, where staff would look at the specifics or the key sections of the standard. They've learned about all the SDGs and their targets and do a preliminary mapping. The second phase is where we actually use the UN developed tool called Linked SDGs. And that uses a word affiliation program where we would upload certain sections of the standard to the tool, and that would help us identify any SDGs that we're missing, as well as verify the ones that we've already mapped to. And then the third phase is to compare the 2 results and come out with a final mapping result. What we do with that final mapping result is we actually have two places where we put them. The first is we've developed a new section of our standards called the SDG Forward. And the SDG Forward will now appear in all new standards, which identify and outline that this standard has been mapped, and these are the specific SDG targets that they link to. The second place is we actually have an SDG database on our website, which we'll show you later on. And that's a searchable tool to search whether you want to look at a specific standard, you can find out which SDG it links to, or if you want to find a specific SDG and all the standards that align with that specific SDG target. And so some of the benefits of this initiative, which is still ongoing, is that it enables organizations to easily identify standards that are supportive of the SDGs. And that provides standards as credible tools to help those organizations implement actions toward achieving the SDGs. It also helps accelerate progress towards shaping a sustainable future and contributing to the SDG's central transformative promise of leaving no one behind. To review some of our key achievements, we did publish our report back in last year, where we've outlined the mapping methodology for any sustainable or SDO to review and also replicate our work. We've also completed SDG mapping of all our published standards as of August 2022, and we're continuing to develop and map the rest of our standards, including all new standards coming out. We've launched our SDG website, including our SDG standards database. So again, that's that searchable database, which links directly also to our standards store. We've also put out an SDG webinar that outlines a lot of the key aspects of our report, which are also available on demand on our website, which we can share in the chat, or which we've already done. Thanks, Anna. And we also are developing our case studies. So we've published 7 that are on the website, and we have a few more coming out this year, and we plan to develop more in the coming years. We've trained all of our staff on SDGs and how to map them using our mapping methodology. And we're also developing member awareness content to our over 10,000 members who are developing standards so that they're aware of the SDGs, the SDG forward, and continue to consider them when writing standards. Oh, and the last point here was just about the SDG forward section that's new, that outlines and communicates the SDG linkages. So now I'll go into one quick case study to share with you. So this standard is CSA S478, which is durability in buildings. This standard aims to help increase the durability and sustainability in buildings. So it considers how buildings impact the environment, as well as how the environment impacts the buildings. And I think we all know that ensures that our buildings are able to resist the impacts of our changing climate. This standard is primarily used in the design phase of a building, and a version of it is also referenced in the National Building Code. So during our mapping phase, what we've done is we've linked we've used our 3-phase methodology, and we've come out with these SDG linkages. And so that's 9, 11, 12, and 13. And I'll quickly show you our database, which goes into each of the target as well. This is CSA's corporate website with our SDG page. And when we scroll to the bottom, we find our SDG database. Here again, you can search by goal, you can search by target, the standard title. Here, what we're going to do is search by our standard designation. So S478 was the standard. And below, we'll see here, it comes up, and the SDG targets that are linked to them. So for example, we have SDG 9.1, that's to develop quality, reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure to support economic development and human well-being. We also have 9.4. This standard links to 9.4, upgrading infrastructure and retrofit industries to make them sustainable with increased resource use efficiency, greater adoption of clean and environmentally sound technologies and industrial processes. I won't go into each of them, but you can see there's a clear linkage to all of these SDG targets, and we've made them available for anyone to search. In our case studies that I've mentioned, we have 7 published on our website, including this one. We went further and talked about what are the most notable linkages, what are the strongest linkages with this particular standard. And it outlined through the interviews and through the research, we came out with these 2. So SDG 9 is, it supports the building of resilient and sustainable infrastructure, and it provides information on design service life expectations, as well as a strong linkage with SDG 13, climate action. It helps to reduce embodied carbon in construction by reducing the need for more frequent replacements of buildings, such as roofs, or even the entire replacement of the building itself, so that there's not a need for demolish and rebuild. We can keep our buildings up for longer, in use for longer. It also provides tips and strategies to deal with climate change impacts, including considerations for higher wind loads and increased precipitation and flooding. So that was a quick example of the type of linkages that our standards can support. So I'll pass it back to Anna to take us through the next steps.
Thank you, Adriana. So before we talk about where we plan to go with our SDG work, let's just recap on what we've achieved to date. So as Adriana mentioned, we have developed a mapping methodology for our internal standards and our staff. We've determined a strong level of alignment between the CSA standards and the SDGs. And we've gathered a strong understanding of the challenges and opportunities that are available to CSA and the steps needed to act on those opportunities. And finally, we are demonstrating leadership amongst SDO peers. Currently, there are no other standards bodies that have conducted this type of in-depth research on standards and the SDGs. And so we're very eager to continue this work. We see the importance in it, as well as our staff and our members see the importance. So we want to make sure that we are continuing this work. So we will continue to educate the SDG initiative to staff, members, and showcase the alignment to our internal strategic initiatives and cross-sector priorities. And we'll continue to update our internal procedures and tools to maximize this alignment between standards and SDGs and refine it as necessary. And continue to monitor and map all new standards and other deliverables to the SDGs using our methodology, and we'll refine that methodology as necessary as well. And finally, we want to continue to communicate just as we are today and showcase our progress and collaborate with government and connect the value of SDGs to ESGs and other priorities as well. Great, and that's it for our presentation. So we'll open it up to the chat. If anybody has questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, or if you're comfortable enough, you can come off mute and on video and ask your question. No questions? Everything was very, very clear.
I could add that there are some other standards development organizations who are also doing some work with SDGs. ISO, which is the International Standards Organization, is one of them. They've also developed their own type of mapping. There's also the IEC, International Electrotechnical Commission, have been doing some work, but we are the only ones who've sort of published our methodology publicly, and have done that research with our academics to validate it. And we also have all the information on the website, as I mentioned, of all the standards. We have a graph as well that maybe I can show at the bottom that shares all the SDGs and how many standards linked to them. Several of our standards are also free view access. Some of them are pay for access, but I know a lot of government uses the standards, and they're referenced in legislation and regulations. So if your organization's already using that standard, you can come onto our website, search the title, and you can kind of see which SDGs you're already supporting using those standards.
I don't see any questions in the chat. And you always feel free to reach out to us. Our emails are noted on the slide here. If you have any questions that you think of later, feel free to reach out. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll give you back a few minutes in your Friday.
Yeah, enjoy.